Amid days when the mind is constantly pulled taut by notifications, expectations, and thoughts that refuse to come to rest, perhaps you are carrying a familiar kind of weariness. Not the fatigue of the body, but the exhaustion that comes from having to remain alert to keep understanding, to keep becoming something all the time. This video does not arrive to teach you something new. It comes to give you permission to set things down. Tonight you are invited into a slow journey, a journey through the world of creatures with what we call superpowers, not to compare strength, but to listen to the quiet ways life endures, adapts, and persists with a wisdom more subtle than we often imagine. In this calm space, questions about the meaning of life are not raised in order to be answered, but to be allowed to rest like small stones sinking gently to the bottom of clear water. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." But in the night, perhaps we do not need to awaken. Perhaps it is enough to feel safe enough to stop trying. Let this voice move more slowly than your thoughts. Let each sentence pass without the need to hold on to it. If your eyelids begin to feel heavy, if awareness starts to loosen and dissolve, then you are already moving in the right direction. We will begin very gently, and all you need to do is listen and allow your mind to rest. There are questions that do not need to be answered right away. They only need to be set down very gently at the right moment. And the question, if you could choose a superpower, what would it be, is one of them. It often appears when we are tired, when the mind has already carried too much through the day, when the effort to control, to understand, to become a better version of ourselves begins to soften and loosen. At night, that question no longer feels playful or entertaining. It becomes a subtle sign of modern exhaustion, a quiet wish to move beyond the limits of this fragile human condition. Immortality, so time no longer has teeth. Strength, so the feeling of helplessness can finally fade. The power to heal, so we might return to a moment before the cracks appeared. Or perhaps just one very small ability to rest without feeling that we are doing something wrong. People today rarely lack information. What we lack is silence. The mind is constantly pulled outward by news, by expectations, by questions that demand immediate answers. And in that ceaseless motion, we slowly forget something very basic. Life does not operate by speed. It operates by rhythm. The opening of tonight's journey is not meant to take you into a fantastical world. It offers only a very gentle shift in perspective. That the superpowers we so often dream of, regeneration, endurance, adaptation, the ability to continue, have never belonged only to comic books. They are already here in the real world, within creatures that live very quietly, without spectacle, without needing admiration. They exist in their own way, as if they have never known that what they do might be called extraordinary. When we observe nature at a slower pace, something gradually reveals itself. Life does not pursue omnipotence. It does not try to conquer everything. What it repeats over millions of years is the ability to adapt, the ability to endure without resentment, the ability to recover along paths that make no noise, and sometimes the ability to continue even when there is no clear reason to do so. In that world, there is no concept of success or failure, only temporary solutions that are sufficient to keep going. There are beings that do not resist damage but learn how to reorganize themselves after it. There are beings that do not need to understand their environment but merge with it. And there are beings entirely unaware that they are doing something miraculous, because for them, it is simply the only way to live. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." But perhaps in the night we do not need to awaken in that sense. We do not need to illuminate ourselves with analytical light. We only need to be calm enough not to fight what is happening inside us, because many of the most important human processes occur when consciousness loosens its grip, when we sleep, when we dream, when we allow ourselves not to be in control. The shift in this idea is not in claiming that humans too have superpowers. It lies in remembering that we were never separate from nature to begin with. Our bodies still carry ancient rhythms. The breath knows how to slow itself down. The heart knows how to adjust. The brain knows how to enter a resting state when it is allowed to. We do not need to command these things. They have known what to do for a very long time. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful than within yourself." This peace is not a goal to be achieved. It is a capacity that already exists, but is often obscured by noise. And night, with its natural gentleness, is simply the right moment for that capacity to reveal itself. When the voice slows, when sentences are no longer connected by argument but by breath, when the listener no longer needs to follow, only to remain. Entering this quiet universe of living wonders is not a departure from being human. On the contrary, it is a way of returning. Here, creatures with superpowers are not told as strange exceptions, but as silent mirrors. They do not teach us how to become stronger. They only remind us that simply continuing to exist can sometimes be a very great power. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." But there are also nights when we do not need to give birth to any star at all. We only need to allow that chaos to rest, to settle, to exist without being pushed to turn into meaning, because meaning does not always need to be found. Sometimes it appears on its own when we stop searching. This opening, therefore, does not lead you toward knowledge. It leads you away from the need to know, away from the pressure to stay alert, away from the feeling that you are missing something if you do not keep up with every sentence, if your eyelids begin to feel heavy, if your thoughts no longer connect smoothly, if you feel that you do not need to hear everything. That is not a failure of attention. It is a sign of trust. You do not need to remember the names of species. You do not need to record details. You do not need to carry any concepts into sleep. You only need to remain within the safety of not having to do anything at all. And in that space, you may notice something very gentle. The superpower humans need most is not always the ability to change the world. Sometimes it is the ability to allow ourselves to rest within this world without feeling out of place. We will continue very slowly, not to arrive anywhere, only to remain. And if sleep comes before the story has fully unfolded, then perhaps that is nature's quiet answer to the original question offered in the most silent way possible. When the question of superpowers is settled like a small stone reaching the bottom of still water, when the mind no longer searches for abilities that rise above the world, we begin to drift very slowly into a more concrete story, no longer fiction, no longer symbol, but a small living creature, real breathing quietly carrying within itself a capacity that makes humans pause for a long time and think. Axolotl. If you have never heard its name, that is entirely natural. The axolotl does not live under the spotlight of attention. It does not roar. It does not hunt with ferocity. It does not display power. It is simply there, in the dark, quiet waters of ancient lakes in Mexico. And when it loses a part of its body, it simply grows it back. An arm, a leg, a portion of the heart, a fragment of the brain. No panic, no urgency, no regret. In the world of the axolotl, loss is not an ending. It is only a transitional phase. Science calls this regeneration. But if we look more slowly enough not to be swept away by amazement, we may see that this is more than a biological phenomenon. It is a way of existing. The axolotl does not fight injury. It does not treat loss as an enemy. It does not try to return to being whole as it once was. It simply continues in whatever form life now allows. One of the strangest things about the axolotl is neoteny. It reaches biological maturity yet never grows up in the way other creatures do. It retains its larval form for its entire life. External gills, gentle round eyes, a soft body. As if it refuses to enter the stage life usually calls completion. In a world that constantly urges us to grow up to become hardened, decisive, less vulnerable, the axolotl exists as a very quiet question. Must maturity always require the loss of softness? Humans often believe that strength means not being wounded, but the axolotl reveals another possibility. Strength is knowing how to recover. Carl Jung once wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." But the axolotl does not choose to become anything at all. It carries no ego, no narrative, no memory of what was lost. It simply lets life do its work. And it is precisely this that causes humans to stop and reflect. Because in the human mind, loss is always accompanied by memory. Wounds do not reside only in the body, but in how we remember them. We do not merely lose something. We carry the story of having lost it. We carry the fear that it might happen again. We carry the image of who we were before the damage. If the body could repair itself, would we still fear loss? perhaps we would, but that fear would be different. The axolotl does not return to a previous state. It does not regenerate in order to be as before. What grows back is what fits the present moment. No nostalgia, no comparison, no regret. In the silence of the water, the axolotl teaches a lesson without words. Life does not need loyalty to the past in order to continue. It is no surprise that humans look at the axolotl and dream. Dream of regenerative medicine. Dream of healing irreversible injuries. Dream of renewing the body as one revises a draft. Yet while we are busy dreaming of the future, the axolotl itself stands on the edge of disappearance. Its lakes are drying. Its environment is polluted. The world it adapted to over millions of years is no longer making room for it. There is a very quiet paradox here. A creature that can regenerate nearly everything within its body cannot protect itself from changes made by humans. Life can repair itself, but it cannot always repair the world around it. This deepens the story of the axolotl. It is no longer a story of power, but a story of limits. Even the most extraordinary ability requires an environment gentle enough to sustain it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Everything that happens is either endurable or not. If it is endurable, then endure it." The axolotl has endured in its own way, but there are things that cannot be endured forever. And this brings us back to ourselves. We too possess remarkable capacities for recovery. The body knows how to heal. The mind knows how to forget slowly. The nervous system knows how to return to balance. But all of this happens only when the environment is safe enough, when there is no constant threat, when vigilance is not required at every moment, when rest is permitted. Perhaps that is why the story of the axolotl should not be told with excitement. It needs to be told slowly, in the way it lives, so that the listener does not merely marvel but settles. If the body could repair itself, would we still fear loss? Perhaps we would. But we could learn not to identify ourselves with that fear, just as the axolotl does not identify itself with what has been lost. It does not ask why. It does not ask how long. It does not ask whether it will ever be the same again. It simply continues. And in the night, as you lie here listening to a creature that does not know, it is special. Something very gentle may occur. You do not need to regenerate completely. You do not need to fix everything. You do not need to become a whole version of yourself. Perhaps it is enough for one very small part of you to recover. A deeper breath, a muscle that softens, a thought that can be set down. The axolotl does not teach us how to defeat loss. It shows us that loss does not have to be a final sentence. And as this story closes, not with a conclusion, but with a settling, we begin to drift toward another shape of strength. No longer regeneration, but energy. No longer repair, but release. Somewhere in the darkness of the river, another creature carries electricity within its body. When the story of the axolotl comes to a close in the very slow settling of dark water, when the idea of regeneration no longer appears as a miracle, but as a natural rhythm of life, the current of the night does not stop. It simply changes direction. If the axolotl teaches us about recovery, then the next creature offers a different lesson, a lesson about power, but not the kind of power humans usually imagine. Somewhere in the murky, shadowed rivers of South America where sunlight barely reaches the riverbed, there lives a creature that does not need sight in order to see. It does not require large muscles. It does not need sharp teeth. It does not possess a form meant to inspire fear. Its body drifts quietly through the water, soft, elongated, almost unnoticeable. The electric eel. If we look at it with the eyes of daytime, we might pass it by. It is not beautiful in a familiar sense. Not majestic, not commanding, but in darkness where ordinary senses begin to fail, the electric eel carries a different kind of strength within itself. Not a strength meant for display, but a strength meant for orientation, a way of knowing where it is in the world. The body of the electric eel functions like a living power plant. Thousands of electrical cells are arranged in sequences storing energy, releasing it in precisely timed pulses. Electricity is not merely a weapon. Electricity is language. It is a map. It is how the eel sees the world. In muddy water, the eel emits weak electrical signals, listens to the feedback, and from this constructs an image of its surroundings. No light, no color, only vibration. It does not perceive shape, but it senses presence. And perhaps this is where the story begins to touch something human. Because many moments in life place us in darkness as well. Not the darkness of night, but the darkness of uncertainty. We do not know what lies ahead. We cannot clearly see boundaries. We cannot distinguish danger from opportunity. In such moments, humans often try to increase their power, speak louder, control more tightly, assert more forcefully. But the electric eel does none of this. It does not attempt to eliminate darkness. It learns how to exist within it. The electricity it releases is not meant to dominate the environment, but to converse with it. A very different form of power, not imposed, not theatrical, not dependent on recognition, just enough to know where it is and what is nearby. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. But the electric eel does not fight monsters. It does not turn itself into something more terrifying in order to survive. It does not choose a path of constant violence. Its power is restrained. Strong electrical discharges are used only when necessary. Most of the time, it relies on very small pulses, almost harmless, just enough to sense. Perhaps this is a quiet lesson about power. That power does not always need to look aggressive. That survival does not always require domination. That some forms of strength exist solely to keep oneself safe. Humans often confuse power with control. We believe that if we can control more, we will feel less afraid. Yet the more we control, the more tense we become. The more we defend, the more exhausted we grow. The electric eel does not control the river. It simply learns how to read its most subtle signals. It does not need to conquer darkness. It only needs to understand what the darkness is saying. There are ways of seeing that do not require light, and there are ways of knowing that do not need to be formed into words. Carl Jung once wrote in The Red Book, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The electric eel does not illuminate the darkness. It makes the darkness perceptible. And in the night, as the listener rests within themselves, this may touch something deeper still. Because many of our fears do not arise from anything specific, but from not being able to see what is happening inside us. Vague emotions, nameless tensions, anxieties without clear shape. We want to eliminate them, to extinguish them, to push them away. But perhaps like the electric eel, we do not need to remove the darkness. We only need to be sensitive enough to sense it without panic. The eel's bioelectricity does not destroy its environment. It creates just enough information, a soft boundary. And perhaps the kind of power humans need at night is not the power to act, but the power not to overreact. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. But this strength is not loud." It is not about forcing the mind into silence. It is about allowing the mind to feel without being carried away. Like the electric eel drifting through dark water, releasing gentle signals, then listening. In that listening, there is no urgency, no tension, only presence. And as the story of the electric eel continues to flow, it does not lead us toward a climax. It leads us into a different state, a state of gentle awareness. You do not need to turn on a light in your mind. You do not need to understand everything that is happening. Perhaps a single small pulse is enough, a deeper breath, a warmth in the chest, a thought allowed to drift past enough to let you know that you are safe. The electric eel does not live in a state of constant tension. It activates its power only when needed. Most of the time, it exists in a mode of energy conservation. And this may be an important lesson for modern humans who live perpetually switched on, always alert, always reacting, always expending. There are forms of strength that appear only when we allow ourselves not to use them. As this story closes, not with an electric shock, but with the steady flow of water, we begin to sense the next movement of the journey. If the axolotl taught us that loss is not the end, if the electric eel taught us that power does not need to be violent, then somewhere else in another small body, life is preparing a lesson about the cost of survival. No longer electricity, no longer regeneration, but pain chosen. Their evolution is no longer gentle, and the next story will not be as smooth as a river. It will be sharper, more barbed, yet it still must be told in a very slow voice. Because only in that slowness are we safe enough to listen. When the aftertaste of bioelectric current still rests lightly in the mind, when the idea of power without aggression has softened like water after a passing ripple. The journey of the night does not stop. It simply goes deeper, darker, and more honest. Because not every story of life is gentle. Not every strategy of survival takes the shape of soft adaptation. There are places where evolution does not whisper. It clenches its teeth. There, in the humid, shadowed forests of Central Africa, lives a small creature carrying a secret that makes the observer hesitate not out of admiration, but out of unease. The hairy frog. A name that sounds almost harmless, but its story is not. When threatened, when there is no way back, the hairy frog does not flee, it does not play dead, it does not release poison. It does something that humans find very difficult to look at directly. It breaks its own bones. The bones of its toes pierce through the skin, becoming claws, sharp, real, painful. Not because it does not feel pain, but because it accepts pain. Here, pain is not an accident, it is a strategy. Life, when pushed to the edge, sometimes no longer has elegant choices, only effective ones. And in this moment, evolution does not play the role of healer. It plays the role of pragmatist. The hairy frog has no armor, no long fangs, no overwhelming strength. What it possesses is an extreme decision. If injury is inevitable, then it will be injury with purpose. In that moment, pain is no longer something to avoid. It becomes a tool. Perhaps this is why the story unsettles us. Because we are accustomed to a very clear belief: pain is wrong. Pain must be eliminated. Pain is a sign of failure. But in the world of the hairy frog, pain carries no moral meaning. It is neither good nor bad. It is simply part of life trying to continue. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in "The gay science to live is to suffer to survive, is to find some meaning in the suffering." But the hairy frog does not search for meaning. It does not philosophize pain. It does not tell a story about itself. It simply acts. And it is precisely this absence of narrative that allows its story to echo more deeply. Because humans are different. We do not only suffer, we remember that we have suffered. We assign pain a story, an identity, a scar in memory. The hairy frog carries no memory of breaking its bones. When the danger passes, the bones heal, the skin closes. No resentment, no nostalgia. Life continues without needing to become a lesson. Yet the story of the hairy frog does not end there. It does not break its bones only to protect itself. It does so in a very specific context, guarding its eggs. Parental instinct in this world does not take the form of tenderness. It takes the form of quiet sacrifice. The hairy frog stands watch over its eggs in rushing water. It stays. It endures. It turns its own body into the final barrier. There is no romance here, no glory. Only a stark truth: new life is sometimes paid for by the pain of older life. And here the story begins to touch a deeper layer of philosophy. Survival is not always beautiful. There are forms of existence that cannot be told with soft light, cannot lull us with images of peace. Yet they still need to be told slowly so that they do not wound us further. Carl Jung once wrote, "In Ion, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The hairy frog belongs to that darkness, not to glorify pain, but to face the reality that life is not always gentle. Humans often seek healing by avoiding stories like this, yet sometimes acknowledging that survival can be brutal brings a different kind of peace, a peace that is not naive. Because many people carry experiences like this within them, even if they have never broken bones in a literal sense. Painful choices made to protect what matters. Invisible sacrifices. Decisions that harm the self so that others may be safe. Not everyone has the privilege of choosing a beautiful path, and that does not make them less worthy. The hairy frog is not a symbol of heroism. It does not triumph. It does not change the world. It simply does what must be done so that life can continue. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny for what could more aptly fit your needs." But there are destinies that do not feel fitting, not harmonious, not well-timed, and still they must be accepted. This story, therefore, is not meant to weigh the listener down. It seeks something else to free them from the illusion that every path of existence must be beautiful. There are phases in life where survival is possible only through pain. Not because we are weak, but because circumstances do not allow us to be strong in any other way. The hairy frog does not choose pain because it wants to. It chooses it because it is the only choice. And perhaps the most healing part of this story is the quiet acknowledgement that you do not need to feel guilty for having done painful things to protect what mattered. Not every sacrifice needs applause, but it does need understanding. As the story of the hairy frog slowly closes, not with victory, but with a long exhale, we begin to sense the next movement of the journey. From regeneration to power to pain. And then from pain towards something that seems almost opposite fragility. Not the fragility of weakness, but the fragility of a life stretched tight like a thread. Somewhere a tiny creature is hovering, burning energy so quickly that stopping for even a moment could mean disappearance. But that is the story of the next part. For now, allow the story of the hairy frog to settle. No conclusion, no judgment. Just the knowledge that in the quiet universe of living wonders, there are beings that exist not to inspire, but to speak an ancient truth. Life does not promise gentleness, but it always seeks a way to continue. And sometimes surviving a long night is already a very great form of courage. When the story of the hairy frog closes with the heavy weight of a painful choice, when we have looked directly at the truth that survival is not always beautiful. The current of the night does not stop there. It does not wish to leave the listener too long in darkness. It gently shifts direction from heaviness to fragility, from endurance to a rhythm of life stretched thin like a thread. Somewhere as the forest begins to breathe more slowly, as the last light of day dissolves into narrow, fading streaks, a tiny being appears like a vibration, the hummingbird. If we look only with ordinary eyes, we might think it is something too fast to truly perceive, a flash of color, a flicker of wings, a moment that passes before it can settle. But if the night allows us to slow down, if the voice is gentle enough not to disturb the heartbeat, we begin to notice that the hummingbird does not simply live fast, it lives at the edge. The hummingbird can hover, fly backward, move in ways that in the human world exist only in imagination or complex machines. But for the hummingbird, these movements are not marvels, they are the only way to survive. Its wings beat dozens of times each second. Its heart races so quickly that placed inside a human body, it might be treated as an alarm. Energy is consumed continuously. There are no long rests, no excess reserves. The hummingbird lives in what could be called an absolute present. It has no luxury of delay, no permission to drift. Every moment matters. Every beat is a decision. And here the story begins to touch something very familiar to modern humans. Because many people live like hummingbirds, always moving, always reacting, always spending energy simply to avoid falling. We call it productivity. We call it ambition. We call it trying. But the body calls it something else: depletion. The hummingbird has no privilege of prolonged exhaustion. If it does not take in enough energy, if it cannot find flowers, if it stops for too long, life ends quickly. And so it has developed a remarkable ability, an intelligent surrender to its own limits. Torpor, a state of short-term hibernation. Body temperature drops, heart rate slows, energy is conserved. Not sleep for dreaming, but sleep for survival. In those hours, the hummingbird does not fly, does not search, does not perform. It allows itself to become weak. And this may be the most philosophical moment in the entire story, because in the human world, allowing oneself to become weak is often seen as failure, as giving up, as not trying hard enough. But for the hummingbird, not stopping is what would be dangerous. There are forms of life that can exist only if they know when to disconnect. Carl Jung once wrote, "In the undiscovered self, the creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct." Torpor is not a strategy of calculating intellect. It is the instinct of life that understands its own limits. The hummingbird does not blame itself for needing rest. It does not attach moral meaning to weakness. It does not compare itself to larger, slower creatures. It simply listens to its body. And perhaps this is a very gentle lesson for those who are tired. We often believe that greatness must come with size, that strength must look solid and imposing, that value must be visible from afar. The hummingbird exists as a quiet counter-argument. It is small, it is fragile. It could disappear after a single cold night. And yet its entire body is a masterpiece of refinement, a perfect balance between speed and rest, between expenditure and preservation. Greatness here does not lie in enduring more. It lies in knowing when to stop. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to throw away." But this is not a call to hurry. It is a reminder that time is finite, not so we may waste it unconsciously, but so we may live in rhythm. The hummingbird does not waste energy, but it does not hoard it either. It lets energy circulate. And perhaps what makes the hummingbird special is not its speed, but its precision in using strength. It knows which flowers to return to. It remembers flight paths. It carries a form of memory that does not require thought, a memory that serves continuation, not nostalgia. While humans often carry memory as a burden, the hummingbird carries memory as a map without judgment, without regret, simply to return where it needs to return. And here in the quiet of the night, this story touches something very tender. Because many people are trying to live faster than their capacity allows, trying to fly without knowing when to land, trying to hover in the air of expectations without allowing themselves to touch the ground. The hummingbird does not live long, but in its short time, it lives in full rhythm. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. The hummingbird seems to dance constantly in the air, but its rhythm is not frantic. It is a rhythm that only those who are quiet enough can hear. And perhaps in the night, as the listener begins to loosen each small muscle, as the breath slows, the story of the hummingbird is no longer a story about a bird. It becomes a whisper that you do not need to be bigger to have value. You do not need to be faster to be recognized. You do not need to strain to prove that you are alive. Perhaps you only need to learn one very small thing to know when to fly and when to sleep. If your eyelids begin to feel heavy, if thoughts no longer connect cleanly, if words pass without needing to be held, this is not distraction. It is the torpor of the mind, an ancient resting state the body knew long before you had a name for it. The hummingbird is not ashamed of torpor. It does not treat it as failure. It knows it is the condition that allows flight to return tomorrow. And as this story slowly comes to a close, not with a sudden ascent, but with a soft settling, the journey prepares to move once more toward another form of existence. No more speed, no more pain, no more electricity, but time itself. Somewhere far away, another creature lives as if time can be bent. But that is the story of the next part. For now, allow your body to do what the hummingbird does so well, rest at the right moment. No effort required. No need to understand everything. Just remain with this breath and let your own fragility be cared for by the quiet gentleness of the night. When the fragile flight of the hummingbird has settled into a brief and necessary rest, when the idea of stopping at the right moment has had time to sink into each breath, the current of the night continues onward. Not toward speed, but toward time. Not time measured by clocks, not the time of schedules and deadlines, but time as a deep current where what we believe to be irreversible suddenly becomes softer. Out there in salty waters far from shore lives a creature that is almost transparent, so small it is easily overlooked, yet carrying within it an ability that makes humans slow down for a long while when they encounter it. Turritopsis dohrni, the jellyfish often called the immortal jellyfish. If most life follows a straight line, born, grown, aged, then gone. This being chooses a different path. When faced with injury, illness, or danger, it does not fight. It does not flee. It does not strain to prolong existence through force. It turns back. Its mature body dissolves. Its cells reorganize, and it returns to a larval stage as if time itself has been gently wound backward. No panic, no tragedy, only a very deep adjustment. Science calls this a reversal of the life cycle. But if we listen with the ears of the night, we may hear something else. Life does not necessarily move forward along a single straight line. This touches a very human obsession. We fear time, not only because it passes, but because it does not return. We regret. We mourn. We carry older versions of ourselves like quiet ghosts. And so the idea of immortality always tempts us, not because we truly wish to live forever, but because we want to escape irreversibility. Yet the immortal jellyfish offers no romantic dream. It is not immortal in the way humans imagine. It can still be eaten. It can still die from harsh conditions. Immortality here does not mean invulnerability. It is simply one very specific ability when needed. It begins again, carrying no memory, no ego, no story of who it once was. Another creature even more ancient carries a similar mode of existence, the Hydra. Not the monster of myth, but a small freshwater organism that barely ages. The Hydra has no old age in the biological sense. Its cells are continuously renewed. Damage does not accumulate over time as it does in the human body. If not destroyed by external forces, it can continue to exist without moving closer to death. Yet what is remarkable is not its longevity. It is the way the Hydra does not cling to a fixed form. Its body is always regenerating. There is no final version, no clear destination. Life here resembles a gentle loop rather than a one-way road. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in The Will to Power, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." But the Hydra does not become stronger through accumulation. It does not evolve into a superior version of itself. It simply continues without aging in the way we understand. This raises a question that is soft, yet profound. If life is not linear, why do we force ourselves to live as though everything allows only one chance? Humans carry a very particular fear. The fear of being too late, of missing out, of having passed a point of no return. We believe each mistake is permanent, each decision irreversible, each passing year a closing door. But in the world of jellyfish and Hydra, no door ever fully closes. Only forms change. Carl Jung once wrote in Psychological Types life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research. The line sounds lighthearted, yet within it lies an important idea: life does not have to unfold according to the sequence we once imagined. There are returns, late beginnings, phases that go nowhere at all and still carry meaning. The immortal jellyfish does not turn back to correct mistakes. It does not learn from experience. It simply changes its mode of existence. And perhaps the most healing thought here is not the fantasy of living forever, but this: you are not trapped in a single version of yourself. You are not the sum of what has happened. You are not an unchangeable timeline. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Observe constantly that all things take place by change, and accustom yourself to consider that the nature of the universe loves nothing so much as to change the things which are." From this view, time is not a thief. It is a process of transformation. Yet a gentle clarity remains necessary. Immortality does not equal safety. The immortal jellyfish can still vanish. The Hydra still depends on its environment. Life, however flexible, still requires conditions to continue. And this brings us back to ourselves. We too have the capacity to change, to reorganize, to begin again in many different ways, but only when the environment is gentle enough, only when we are not constantly under threat, only when rest is allowed. In the night when light has withdrawn, when no one demands that you move forward, the idea of time begins to soften. You do not need to keep going right now. You do not need to fix everything. You do not need to become a better version of yourself before sleep. Perhaps, like the jellyfish, you only need to dissolve a little, to loosen forms that have grown rigid, to allow yourself to return to something simpler, not to disappear, but to exist differently. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "All that is straight lies. All truth is crooked. Time itself is a circle." If time is not straight, then perhaps you do not need to walk straight either. Some nights are for staying. Some phases are for turning inward. Sometimes beginning again is not failure, but a deep honesty with life itself. As the story of the jellyfish and the Hydra settles not into a conclusion, but into a softer feeling for time, the night's journey prepares to shift once more. From creatures that nearly escape death, we will move toward creatures of remarkable intelligence, not bending time, but bending how we define consciousness. Somewhere in deep water, in tentacles reaching into the world, another kind of mind is waiting to be listened to. But that is the story of the next part. For now, let time slow within you. There is nowhere you need to go, no one you need to become. Just know this life is not a straight line to be completed, but a current that can bend very gently when the night is quiet enough. When the idea of time has softened, when the feeling that everything does not have to move along a single straight line has settled deeply enough in the mind, The night's journey continues to drift, this time not toward how long life lasts, but toward life that knows it is living. Not in the sky, not on land, but in the deep layers of water where light has become only a memory and the world is sensed through vibration, sound, and touch. Here, intelligence does not take the familiar human shape. It does not sit neatly inside a single brain. It does not always speak in language, and it does not need to prove itself. Dolphins, octopuses, two very different beings, yet together they pose a quiet question. What is intelligence if it does not look like us? Dolphins live in a world of sound. They do not merely hear, they see through echoes. Each click they send out is a touch cast into space. Each returning signal becomes an image. The dolphin's world is never still. It vibrates constantly like a living map. Yet what makes humans pause longer is not only their ability to navigate or communicate in complex ways. It is the signs of self-awareness. Dolphins recognize themselves in mirrors. They call one another with unique sounds like names. They learn from one another. They pass on skills. They form what we might call culture. And when night falls, dolphins do not sink into complete sleep. One half of their brain rests. The other remains awake, always alert, always present, sleeping yet not disappearing. A form of existence very different from humans, creatures who must release all awareness in order to rest. Here, intelligence does not mean total control. It is the ability to share wakefulness with one's own body. Carl Jung once wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "The psyche is a self-regulating system. Dolphins do not force themselves to sleep or to stay awake. Their nervous system finds balance on its own. No struggle, no resistance, an intelligence that knows how to distribute attention." But if dolphins invite us to rethink social consciousness, octopuses challenge the very structure of thought itself. The octopus has no single command center. Most of its neurons are located in its arms. Each arm can sense, decide, and respond almost independently. In other words, the octopus thinks with its entire body. When an arm touches an object, it does not need to send all information back to a central brain. It processes. It reacts. Intelligence here is not concentrated. It is distributed. There is no clear self directing everything, no central authority issuing commands, only a fluid coordination among parts. This unsettles us because we are accustomed to the idea that intelligence must have a center, a commander, an ego. But the octopus exists as a living counterexample. It solves problems, escapes traps, uses tools, remembers, and yet it does so without a structure resembling our own. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy." With the octopus, this statement becomes almost biological fact. Intelligence does not reside in abstract thought. It lives in direct contact with the world. And here, a very gentle question arises. If intelligence can be distributed, if consciousness does not need to be centralized, if thinking can happen outside of words, then why are humans so harsh with themselves when the mind does not think in familiar ways? We often judge ourselves by clarity of reasoning, by coherence of expression, by emotional control. But perhaps much of human intelligence exists outside those standards, in sensation, in intuition, in reactions that arrive before we can name them. Dolphins and octopuses do not think in order to prove they are intelligent. They think in order to continue living. And perhaps that is a deep common thread among all forms of intelligence. Sigmund Freud once wrote in The Ego and the Id, "The ego is first and foremost a bodily ego. Consciousness is not only thought, it is a continuous sensing of being in the world. When humans are exhausted, overstimulated, or overwhelmed by layered thoughts, we often believe we are losing our minds. But perhaps that is simply the moment when our intelligence shifts into another form, quieter, less analytical, closer to the body. Like dolphins that never sleep completely. Like octopuses that do not think from a single point. At night, as the voice slows, as light withdraws, human intelligence begins to disperse. Thoughts no longer line up in neat sequences. Images appear and fade. Sensations arrive before words. And this is not a decline. It is another state of consciousness. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But when the night is gentle enough, perhaps the soul does not need strong colors at all. It needs only a dark, soft background in which to rest. Dolphins do not need to shut down completely to sleep. Octopuses do not need total focus to be intelligent. And humans do not need to understand everything in order to feel at peace. If your mind cannot keep up with every sentence right now, if you feel yourself drifting between ideas, this is not a lack of focus. It may be your intelligence operating in a different way, lighter, deeper, and less demanding. The story of dolphins and octopuses does not come to answer the question of who is smarter. It comes to expand the definition of intelligence. Intelligence as connection, intelligence as adaptation, intelligence as sensing without naming. And in the night when the pressure to appear intelligent dissolves, perhaps you can allow yourself to be intelligent in your own way, without logic, without argument, simply through presence. As the story gently closes, not with a sharp conclusion, but with a subtle widening, the journey prepares to shift once more. From intelligence in deep water, we will move onto land, to beings who build intelligence through memory, emotion, and relationship. But that is the story of the next part. For now, allow your intelligence to spread like tentacles in the dark. No need to gather it, no need to control it. Just know this, even when you are not thinking in familiar ways, you are still alive, and intelligence is still whispering very softly as sleep draws near. When the intelligence of the deep sea is gradually settled, like a long, unhurried breath, when the idea that thinking does not have to wear a human shape has reached the deeper layers of the mind, the night's journey continues, this time no longer beneath the water, but upon familiar ground, the ground we walk on each day. The place where we once believed that only humans knew they were alive. Yet in the quiet of the night, as rigid definitions begin to soften, something very strange becomes clear. Consciousness does not stand alone on two legs. It moves slowly. It bends low. It may take the shape of a trunk, a furred hand, a beak, a steady, watchful gaze. On land, intelligence does not need to speak. It remembers. It feels. And sometimes it grieves. Elephants are among the first beings that made humans pause for a very long time. Not because of their size, but because of memory. Elephants remember paths across deserts after many years. They remember voices. They remember faces that are gone. And when a member of the herd dies, the others return. They touch the bones. They stay for a long while. No haste. No chaos. Just a form of presence that humans recognize very well, yet rarely acknowledge in other species. Carl Jung once wrote in Man and His Symbols, "The symbols of the unconscious are universal." Perhaps grief is universal too. It does not require language in order to exist. Chimpanzees offer another form of intelligence, the intelligence of tools and learning. They use sticks to extract termites, stones to crack nuts, and more importantly, they teach. Not through pure instinct, but through observation, imitation, adjustment. A very early form of culture, yet one strong enough to be passed from generation to generation. Humans once believed culture was the final boundary, but that boundary, like so many others, has blurred. Crows, with their small brains, continue to unsettle the remaining assumptions. They solve multi-step problems. They know how to wait, how to switch tools, how to deceive in a strategic sense, and sometimes they play. Not for survival, not for reward, simply for the stimulation of existing in the moment. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "The child is innocence and forgetting a new beginning a game." Perhaps play is not incidental. Perhaps it is the sign of a consciousness safe enough not to remain constantly on guard. Rats, small and often dismissed, reveal a very quiet form of intelligence empathy. Rats will refuse food in order to free another rat that is trapped, not for reward, not out of fear, simply because another being is in distress. This confronts humans with an uncomfortable question. If empathy does not require abstract morality, why do we claim it as our own? Pigs introduce yet another discomfort. They learn quickly, remember well, recognize themselves in mirrors. And yet they are seen as objects, not subjects. Consciousness in this case does not disappear. It is simply not acknowledged. Parrots do not merely repeat sounds. They understand context. They use words to call to request to interact. Language long considered the final human signature appears again in another form. Not perfect, not academic, but sufficient for connection. And then there are horses. Horses do not display intelligence through tools. They do not solve puzzles. They do not speak, but they read emotion. They respond to breathing, to tension, to subtle unease. They adjust their behavior according to the inner state of the human beside them. A relational intelligence exceedingly refined. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "What we do now echoes in eternity, but perhaps who we are also echoes." Not all intelligence seeks domination, not all consciousness wishes to be named. Many forms of existence simply wish to be with. When we place these beings side by side, elephants, chimpanzees, crows, rats, pigs, parrots, horses, a very different picture emerges. Consciousness is not a tall tower with humans standing at the top. It is more like a wide plain where many forms of life touch the world in their own way. Humans in the story are not diminished. They are simply returned to their proper place, no longer the center but a part. Sigmund Freud once wrote in Civilization and Its Discontents, "The ego is not master in its own house." Perhaps it was never the sole owner of consciousness either, and in the night as boundaries soften, this realization does not bring unease. On the contrary, it may offer a deep relief. You are not the only being that feels, not the only being that remembers, not the only being that grieves. Consciousness is not lonely, it is shared. If your mind begins to drift now, if images blur, if you cannot recall every example, that is perfectly fine. You do not need to hold on to knowledge. You only need to hold the feeling that this world is fuller, deeper, and gentler than we are often taught. As the story of intelligence on land slowly closes, not with a conclusion, but with a quiet acknowledgement, the night's journey continues. From feeling individuals, we will move toward thinking collectives, where intelligence does not reside in a single brain, but in coordination itself. But that is the story of the next part. For now, let your consciousness rest alongside the consciousness of the world. No definitions needed, no classifications required. Just lie still and allow the sense that you are not alone to gently carry you into sleep. When the stories of individual intelligence on land have settled, when we have grown accustomed to the idea that consciousness is not the privilege of a single species, the current of the night moves farther still, not into the depth of any one mind, but into the intelligence that arises between living beings. Here there is no central who, no large brain, no clear ego standing up to decide. There is only movement, only interaction, only very small signals weaving themselves into a larger order. Bees, ants, creatures so small that humans often step past them without noticing, yet they carry a form of intelligence that has made philosophers, scientists, and those exhausted by the demand to be in control of their lives pause for a long time and think. Because in the world of bees and ants, intelligence does not reside inside a single head. It emerges among individuals. A single bee does not know the entire map. A single ant does not understand the whole plan. And yet the colony knows where to go, knows when to move, knows when to stop. There is no leader, no central command, no ego, only coordination. Bees communicate through dance, not to perform, but to recount an experience. An angle, a vibration, a repeated loop. Each movement contains information about distance, direction, and the quality of a flower source. No words are needed, no persuasion. Other bees observe not to obey, but to decide together. If many dance the same dance, that flower is chosen. If not, the colony shifts elsewhere. The decision does not arise from authority, it arises from resonance. Ants do something similar. They leave pheromones, faint chemical traces, almost invisible. When one ant finds food, it does not issue orders. It simply leaves a signal. Others follow. If the path proves effective, the trace grows stronger. If not, it fades. No one is blamed. No one is praised. There is only a self-regulating system guided by gentle feedback. Here, intelligence does not need to know that it is intelligence. It does not reflect on itself. It does not tell a story about who it is. It simply functions. This touches a deep belief of modern humans that to be intelligent, one must have a strong ego, that to decide correctly, one must control. Bees and ants exist as a quiet rebuttal that there are forms of intelligence that appear only when the ego steps aside. Carl Jung once wrote in The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, "The ego is the center of consciousness, but not the center of the psyche." Perhaps intelligence is the same. The ego may be the center of personal experience, but it is not always the center of intelligence. In the world of the swarm, each individual needs only to perform a very small task. No one carries the entire picture. No one bears responsibility for every outcome. Intelligence arises from trust in the process, and this offers a very quiet comfort to those who are tired, because many people live under the pressure of having to figure everything out alone, to have a plan, to have vision, to have answers. But in nature, many complex systems do not require a central brain. They require time, feedback, small continuous adjustments. Bees do not know how harsh winter will be. Ants cannot predict every environmental change. They respond and allow the system to learn. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Human, All Too Human, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. But in this story, the tribe is no longer a threat. It is a source of intelligence, not the erasure of the individual, but connection without domination. Bees do not lose their nature by joining the hive. Ants do not disappear. They simply do not carry the question, "Who am I?" into every decision. And perhaps that is what makes swarm intelligence feel so light. No anxiety, no hesitation, no paralysis by analysis. Humans, by contrast, often become trapped inside the ego. Am I right or wrong? Will I be judged? What if I choose incorrectly? In the world of bees and ants, there is no personal right or wrong, only what fits or does not fit the whole. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." But this is not a call for blind sacrifice. It suggests something gentler, that at times individual well-being and collective well-being are not in opposition. In a swarm, each individual survives precisely because the whole functions well. And in the night when we loosen the need to control our lives, this idea can bring a deep softness. You do not need to carry everything. You do not need to think of everything. You do not need to know every outcome in advance. Perhaps you only need to do one very small thing in this moment: breathe. Lie still. Listen. Like a bee performing its one dance. Like an ant leaving its small trace. The intelligence of sleep does not lie in understanding the entire story. It lies in allowing the story to pass through you. Sigmund Freud once wrote in The Interpretation of Dreams, "The dream is the guardian of sleep." Perhaps these stories are the same. They do not come to wake you. They come to protect sleep by reminding you that you are not alone in existence. As the story of bees and ants slowly settles, not with a clear conclusion, but with the feeling that intelligence can occur without anyone taking command, the night's journey continues its movement. From collectives without ego, we will move toward creatures that live very close to humans, beings that have learned to survive in the shadows of our world. But that is the story of the next part. For now, allow your ego to rest. No definitions needed. No decisions required. Just trust that even when you are not trying to understand, a very ancient form of intelligence is still at work carrying you safely into sleep. When the story of the collective intelligence of bees and ants has settled like a steady breath, when the idea that intelligence can exist without an ego has gently softened in the mind, the journey of the night continues to drift. This time no longer within purely natural systems, but into the borderland between nature and humanity. Not where the lights are bright, not where everything is carefully designed, but in the shaded margins of the city, at the edges of modern life, where living beings are forced to learn a difficult skill: flexibility. Here, evolution is no longer a story spanning millions of years. It becomes an immediate response, an art of survival. Raccoon, pigeon, wolf, dog. Creatures that do not conquer the human world, yet do not disappear either. They remain by changing. The raccoon appears when the night is dark enough, quiet, unshowy. Its hands move with a dexterity that seems almost like thinking, opening lids, unfastening latches, remembering complex pathways through urban space. The raccoon does not need to understand the city. It only needs to read the signs. Which trash bins are safe? What hours humans are absent? Which routes do not lead to traps? Its spatial memory is so refined that what humans call chaos becomes a living map. The raccoon does not resent a changed world. It does not mourn the old forest. It does not resist. It adapts not through strength, but through patient observation. And within this lies a very quiet lesson for humans. Many people are living in a world that no longer resembles what they were prepared for. Old maps no longer work. Familiar rules no longer apply. The raccoon does not try to force the world back into shape. It simply relearns how to exist. The pigeon offers a different story, dismissed as ordinary, labeled a city bird, overlooked. Yet pigeons possess an ability that once astonished humans: extraordinary spatial navigation. They remember routes, rooftops, places of return even when carried very far away. In the pigeon's world, the city is not a maze. It is a familiar structure recorded through light magnetic fields and memory. And what is strange is this: pigeons do not merely return to where they were born. They return to where they belong. Belonging here is not a romantic idea. It is a very ancient form of safety. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." Perhaps wherever there is life, there is also a quiet form of belonging being patiently created. Pigeons do not fight the city. They make it livable. But no story of adaptation can avoid touching a deeper relationship: the bond between wolves and dogs. Wolves were once hunters, independent, cautious, living within tightly bound packs. And then somewhere deep in history, one branch of wolves moved closer to humans, not through conquest, but through mutual curiosity. Dogs did not defeat wolves. Humans did not fully domesticate them either. It was a two-way process, a long compromise. Wolves brought social strength. Humans brought stability. And from this, an interspecies companionship was born. Dogs read human emotion. They respond to gaze, to tone, to the smallest traces of sadness. Not because they are weak, but because they are sensitive. The social intelligence of dogs does not lie in solving abstract problems. It lies in connection. Sigmund Freud once wrote in Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, "In the individual's mental life, someone else is invariably involved. Dogs understand this not through theory, but through presence. They stay when humans are tired, without advice, without explanation." And here, evolution ceases to be competition. It becomes relationship. Wolves never vanished entirely. They remain preserving their independence. But dogs reveal another path: survival through connection, not domination. Raccoons, pigeons, wolves, dogs, each in their own way, yet all sharing one thing: the ability to live in the shadows without losing their essence. Evolution here is not about becoming the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest. Evolution is the art of flexibility, knowing when to move forward, when to retreat, when to change, and when to preserve what is essential. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, but these creatures carry no why. They do not seek meaning, they live." And perhaps this is what makes their story quietly healing. Many people are trying to live correctly according to plans, identities, expectations, yet the world changes without permission, without warning. In such moments, the lesson is not to become harder, but to soften in the right places. The raccoon does not lose its cleverness in the city. The pigeon does not lose its sense of direction among concrete. The dog does not lose its instincts through connection with humans. They do not become something else. They expand the ways in which they exist. Carl Jung once wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." But for these creatures, becoming is not a conscious choice. It is a natural response. And perhaps in the night, humans need to grant themselves a similar permission. You do not need to return to who you were yesterday. You do not need to preserve everything unchanged. You do not need to prove adaptability through pain. Perhaps you only need to learn one very small thing: to be flexible without betraying yourself. As the story of these shadow-dwelling creatures slowly settles, not with a conclusion, but with a deep sense of calm, the journey of the night prepares for its final movement. No longer about strength, no longer about intelligence, no longer about survival. Only a very gentle question remains: after all of this, can we let go? But that is the story of the final part. For now, allow your awareness to adapt to this quiet. No effort required, no direction needed. Simply remain in the shadowed softness of the night, where the gentlest form of flexibility is already guiding you into sleep. As the final story gently comes to a close, not with an answer, but with a pause. Perhaps what matters most is not what you have just heard, but what you no longer need to carry with you. Throughout this journey, we have traveled very far from quiet regeneration through invisible currents, painful choices, fragile rhythms of life, looping time forms of intelligence unlike our own collectives, without ego and creatures living in the shadows of our world. And yet, if all of this were to be gathered into something very simple, it might be, this nature does not create heroes. Nature creates solutions. None of these beings conquered the universe. None were granted power to dominate. They simply had very specific ways to continue. And within that continuation lies a wisdom deeper than any heroic tale. Humans often search for models, someone strong to imitate a victory, to believe in a conclusion to hold tightly. But nature does not tell stories that way. It does not need climaxes. It does not require neat endings. It moves through small adjustments, quiet adaptations, rhythms that are just enough to keep going. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Perhaps the meaning of this journey does not lie in knowledge you can recount, but in the feeling you are carrying right now. You do not need to remember species names. You do not need numbers. You do not need to hold on to concepts. You do not need to stay awake to keep anything at all. Because what needs to remain does not live in memory, but in the body. Your body has been listening for a long time. It has recognized slower rhythms, pauses, moments when understanding is no longer required. Sigmund Freud once called sleep the guardian of mental life in the interpretation of dreams. Not because sleep solves everything, but because it protects the mind from having to do too much. And perhaps that is what these stories have been doing as well. Not teaching you how to live, not pointing out the right path, simply standing watch very lightly so that you are allowed to rest. This world, when seen slowly enough, is not as harsh as we often think. It is deeper, more intelligent, and gentler in ways that do not need to be named. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Everything that happens is either endurable or not. If it is endurable, then endure it." But there are nights when you do not need to endure. You do not need to be strong. You do not need to hold yourself together. You only need to allow. Allow the body to do what it has known how to do for a very long time. Allow the breath to find its own rhythm. Allow thoughts to pass without being held. Allow yourself not to be the center of anything. Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But in the night, you do not need to give birth to any star at all. You only need to let that chaos be set down. To rest. If there is one very small thing to carry into sleep, perhaps it is simply this: you do not need to understand the universe in order to be at peace. Nature does not demand perfection. It only requires enough conditions to continue, and your body is the same. You do not need to make sleep happen. You do not need to achieve rest. Your body knows how to sleep just as nature knows how to exist. And as this voice grows softer, not to disappear, but to merge with your breathing, let every word dissolve like thin mist. No conclusion needed, no memory required, no burdens to carry into tomorrow. Just remain in this moment where you are not a hero, not a problem solver, not the center. Just a very natural part of a world that knows how to continue quietly. Your body knows how to sleep, just as nature knows how to exist. And tonight, that is enough.